Speaker is a creative and highly networked digital marketing and technology entrepreneur, advisor and investor with 20 years of experience building and transforming businesses. Founder of global digital agency Fortune Cooke, and listed as Wired's top 100 listed as one of Wired's top 100 British digital power brokers and ranked by eConsultancy as the second most influential person in digital marketing in the UK. Our next speaker is going to be talking about marketing and how it can change the world. Vice Chair at UNICEF, ladies and gentlemen, please be upstanding and give an incredible warm round of applause to Justin Cooke!
Hey, thank you. Good afternoon, Vilnius. Great to be here. I'm Justin. I'm really talking to you in my capacity today as Vice Chair of UNICEF. And I couldn't think of a better topic to chat about on a Friday afternoon than how marketing can kind of change the world. So I work with UNICEF UK. Just a quick kind of 2 seconds on UNICEF UK. UNICEF UK is a national committee. What we really do is we raise lots of money to help basically impact the lives of millions of children all over the world. And we also kind of work with government on policy and advocacy. So that's kind of the two big things that UNICEF UK does. We also do a couple of things in the UK as well, because it's really important to do things there as well as over there. So we have a thing called Rights Respecting Schools, which basically helps children understand the fact that they actually have rights. And it's amazing what you can see when a child has gone through that program. You know, the impact on their truancy, on the reduction in abuse, the employability, the way that they just generally act. Phenomenal. And then we also have a thing called Baby Friendly, which is effectively the best practice handbook on how to reduce infant mortality. And that's in pretty much every hospital in the UK, and is looked at from across the world as being, this is how you kind of run things when it comes to childbirth. But, you know, in a nutshell, I guess, with UNICEF, you know, the sort of, to my point around sort of the fundraising and so on, ultimately, you know, what we're here to do is to raise, you know, around £100 million a year from individuals, from companies, from foundations, and then we kind of also lobby the UK government to then give another 400 million or so pounds towards UNICEF delivering its programs in the world. So that's kind of what really UNICEF is about. But what I'm here to today is talk about UNICEF from the context of how marketing can change the world. And what I thought I'd do is just imagine if UNICEF was effectively a tech company, right? So UNICEF is kind of up there with Uber. Let's just kind of compare a couple of stats. Today, Uber will basically kind of deliver about 14 million rides. Today, UNICEF will vaccinate about 7.6 million children around the world. So, you know, that's kind of an interesting kind of comparator. Let's think about food. Deliveroo in the UK will deliver about 45,000 meals today. We'll deliver 250,000 tons of food today. So that kind of, you know, so we're up there with the food thing. We've got some serious tech behind all of this stuff. Let's kind of go to the big boy. So let's talk about Amazon and compare them to UNICEF. Amazon's got some pretty cool robot AI-driven warehouses. So do we. We've actually got the world's largest humanitarian supply division in Copenhagen. And that's basically where we respond to the 330 plus crises that are going on in the world right now. We've got about 20 people running this enormous warehouse that looks like the final scene of Raiders of the Lost Ark. And we'll be, you know, in the air, you know, within sort of, you know, moments of a crisis happening, deploying vaccines and life-saving emergency kit and equipment, and that's all kind of coordinated. So, you know, we're definitely up there, you know, from an Amazon, from an Uber, from a Deliveroo, and generally from a sort of technology perspective. But what we're doing is we're genuinely impacting and saving lives. So, you know, when we think about, I guess, you know, everything you guys have been talking about so far at Login, yeah, I don't think there's going to be anyone in this room that's going to kind of argue with the point that I'm making here, which is, The world has changed marketing. I mean, if we just go back, and I'm not going to do it, but you know all of the stories about 10 years ago, X, Y, and Z. I think we can probably just agree that the world has changed marketing. What I thought I'd do is talk about some of the ways in which that change has kind of impacted and affected international aid organizations like UNICEF, and how that has to impact the way that we actually go about marketing. And a lot of this is not just applicable to aid organizations or charities, it's equally applicable to your organizations and those that you work with and partner with. So the first one is this tipping point. And that's basically, last year was the first year that more money was raised around the world from private individuals, companies, foundations, than from governments giving foreign aid. So that's a major kind of moment in the world's history. UNICEF's 71 years old. That's a major kind of step change in the way that we have to think about how we're going to fund all of the great stuff and the important stuff that we need to do. And there's a couple of stats there to sort of back it up. That wasn't kind of an anomaly. This is a kind of an underlying trend, basically. On one way, it's going down. On the other way, thank goodness, it's going up. So that is a really, interesting challenge for someone that's been around for 71 years to go, oh, hold on a second, how do we get the funding we need? What do we need to do to our organization? How do we market ourselves and so on to kind of reflect that? So bank that one. Second one is that, back to my point around the world changing marketing, what we're seeing particularly in the UK, and I think it's pretty applicable to everybody else around the world, we're moving away from regular giving, so people setting up like a bank direct debit and sort of pledging money to UNICEF. I'm going to pledge 10 euros per month, $10 per month to UNICEF, to people now having this kind of mobile relationship with us. And that mobile relationship means that what we now see is more text donations to UNICEF than bank direct debits and donations, right? So again, another massive tipping point in terms of how do we actually raise this money? What channels do we use? And all of that stuff is obviously going on in mobile, and it's not just text now, obviously. I'm sure you walk around and you're seeing contact lists, you're seeing crowdfunding. There's all sorts of other ways in which kind of, finance is being sort of, disintermediated or disrupted. But that's a major thing for us to kind of tackle, when for many, many years, this has been the kind of steady kind of, income that we can kind of rely on, because we know we have this many 100,000 people giving us money on this regular basis. We're moving into a world where we've got to kind of change the way we communicate to these folks, keep that relationship constant. It's not meaning that the income is going down, but it's just a different type of relationship. How do you think about that in marketing terms? Third one is declining trust. So I think this is, again, pretty kind of universal as a theme. I'm sure it's been brought up here so far over the last couple of days. But in the UK, specifically in the charity sector, just like in banking, just like in government, just like in politicians, there's been a decline in trust. And our trust levels as charities has gone down from 65% down to 54% in sort of less than 10 years. So, it's something that we've got to be aware of, and hopefully we can reverse that trend in the way that we communicate and how we communicate and what we communicate with. Fourth one is around, I think, generally the way in which corporations, and I think us as consumers, think about buying stuff and who we want to buy that stuff from. And I'll come back to this again later on in my presentation. But I don't know about you, but I think what I'm seeing a lot more of now is when I talk to brands, when I talk to companies about their strategy, they've kind of started to make that move where maybe a few years ago they would have a kind of corporate social responsibility department, or they'd have a CSR budget, and they may say, yeah, we're going to give this much money to charity, and Now what we're kind of seeing is that sort of sustainability and kind of the old corporate social responsibility is now becoming the business strategy itself, because they've realized that actually, in order to be viable, sustainable businesses, because you guys demand that of them, or we demand that of them from a consumer point of view, they recognize that that is the way that they're actually going to survive. And we've all seen that graph of the number of Fortune 500 companies that are still in existence that weren't, and so on and so forth. So ultimately, I think where we've got to from a kind of corporate point of view is the fast-moving, the smart folks are recognizing that basically baking this type of thing into your strategy at the center as part of your business strategy is the way you deliver superior financial performance. And again, I'll come back to that. But nothing better illustrates that than the guys at Unilever. And if you haven't spent any time checking out kind of where they're moving from a strategic point of view, it's a really, really interesting story. The fifth tipping point is really, I guess, kind of linked to that. From our perspective as donors or supporters, we're demanding more transparency, linked to the trust thing I mentioned earlier. We're demanding transparency, we're demanding accountability. Where is my money going? I want to have some form of kind of ownership. I want to have a connection to the thing I'm supporting. I'm not just going to give you my hard-earned euros. I'm not going to just do that and not expect to kind of know where it's going, what impact it's made. And so I want to kind of know what the impact was. I want to know what the results were. And this, I think, is just a general kind of global trend that, again, we've got to deal with. And again, I think it's not just relevant to charities. And then I guess, I call this one like the what about our back garden? So, if you go onto a UNICEF Instagram post or a Facebook post, you'll probably see someone basically make a comment along these sorts of lines. Okay, it's all very well you're helping these kids in Yemen, Syria, but what about Vilnius? What about London? What about, Manchester? What are you doing in Manchester? There's people, going to, food kitchens in Manchester right now. There's children, not able to kind of have, shoes without holes in, et cetera, et cetera. And that is something that, we're very aware of. And I'm really, really kind of conscious of this fact. And I've been driving really hard to kind of make sure that going forward, UNICEF has, certainly in the UK, as strong a domestic strategy as it does have elsewhere in the world. So we can say with real authority, we're doing some amazing stuff here and making a difference to children in the UK. We're also doing it over there. And that I'll come to later on. And then I guess the seventh point, this is, again, guys, I'm coming at this from kind of primarily a UK point of view. We've got some issues going on in that place right now, you may have heard. But, when we look at this from a kind of global point of view, I think this is true. Ultimately, we're living in a very complicated global market. On my flight out over here on Wizz, I was chatting away to loads of, folks from here who living, working over there, vice versa. Bumped into a friend just over there, didn't even know they were here. We're global. And there are all sorts of sort of different perceptions, different challenges, different uses of media. Behavior is different. And so what's really important is that we've got to kind of recognize the fact that we can no longer kind of broadcast this stuff out in a kind of one-directional way. We've got to kind of really think about the nuancing, because how UNICEF talks to people in Lithuania is going to be different to the way UNICEF talks to people in Liverpool, for example. So there are just a few of the things that I think that are sort of, referencing for me that point around marketing and how the world has changed marketing, particularly for UNICEF. But kind of, I'm an optimist. I'm a kind of, glass half full kind of guy. And, I'm kind of of the view that sort of marketing can actually help change the world. And I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if I didn't believe that. And I think, some other things that I've sort of picked up along the way is that I get a sense that we're sort of moving into a world where we've perhaps also sort of reached peak stuff. We're kind of, we're consuming services now rather than buying stuff. And I think we're experiencing stuff rather than acquiring stuff. And I think what we're going to see is, a different world on the back of some of the big success stories, like Spotify and so on, that really, I think, represent that point. And I think if you actually kind of ask and do your research, you'll find that actually people love engaging, purchasing, consuming, interacting, hanging out, and/or working with a brand that basically is purpose-driven. In fact, this is a piece of data that came from Channel 4 in the UK. It's a TV company. And they said that 60% of people aged between 16 and 34 fit that category. Now, as you get older, those percentages go down, but it's definitely a kind of underlying trend. And then you think about, okay, I mentioned them earlier, people like Unilever and what they're doing about this world. And Unilever is an amazing UNICEF partner. We've been working with them for more than a decade. And when you think about that, brands are aligning themselves to this new kind of purpose-driven world. And this is a screenshot from part of Unilever's kind of overarching kind of global business strategy, which absolutely kind of puts being a kind of purpose-led brand, a purpose-led business, right at the very heart of what they do. There is no longer a separate sustainability strategy. They've got a business strategy, and it's sustainable, it's viable, it's purpose-driven, it's future-facing. And that is the kind of brand that I think is going to be around for the next, 50, 100, maybe longer years, right? They are putting themselves, and from a partnership point of view, they need to work with people like UNICEF to make sure that that is not just a slide in a presentation, it's real. And they need to back it up with some substance. And so, we have a fantastic relationship with Unilever where we are working together to create new products that are going to basically impact children. And we are working with them on, ensuring that we are, engaging with young people all over the world. And it's not just people like Unilever. We've got other organizations that have sprung up. So this is an organization called 2030 Vision. And what they're doing really is trying to bring all of big tech together to say, how does big tech, the giants of this world, actually help support some of these big, ambitious, sustainable development goals? And 2030 Vision is the kind of the umbrella organization that is enabling that to happen. So we are trying to basically kind of use all of this momentum, I guess, when it comes to marketing, to form partnerships that achieve social impact at scale, but they also deliver strategic economic value for the business itself. And I've got an example of that coming up. And so basically, the children win, the brand wins, and because the children win, UNICEF wins. So looking for that win. Domestos is the example. So everyone here, are you familiar with Domestos? Like, Domestos is like, you use it to kind of clean your toilet, right? Biggest killer of children under 5 in the world, poor sanitation. And Domestos, part of the Unilever family, very focused on trying to help solve that under the kind of overarching umbrella called WASH, which is how UNICEF thinks about that side of the world. So what they did was they basically worked with UNICEF and said, look, how can we help you solve this problem? So what they did was they took the bottles of Domestos that you buy in the supermarket and they turned them into a powdered version of that bottle. Powdered version of a bottle, incredibly light, bottle with loads of 99% water in it, very heavy, bottles with water in them, burst, get the powder, get a bucket, source the water locally, you've got a new product impacting that goal. And similarly with Dove, we're working on some amazing stuff with Dove at the moment, which is another Unilever brand. But it's not just about working with brands. We've also, from a marketing point of view, we've got to kind of reach new audiences. We've got to play where our supporters are, where our donors are. And I think a brilliant example of that is a thing called Soccer Aid. Soccer Aid is the world's biggest celebrity football match. And what we do is we get some of the greatest soccer players in the world and the biggest celebrities in the world to come together and have a game of football. And what we do is we broadcast that on TV, and we have fun. And then in the halftime, maybe we'll have Rita Ora perform, and we'll sell out the stadium. We were in Old Trafford, Man United Stadium last year. This year, we moved to Chelsea. It's coming up if anyone wants to try and get a ticket. And we raised lots of money. We raised, so far to date, £30 million through Soccer Aid. What it does is it enables us to perhaps reach people who maybe have heard of UNICEF, but they're not sure about exactly what UNICEF has done or what UNICEF can do if they get their support. It reaches new audiences, and it also allows us to kind of use, effectively the world's favorite sport to then piggyback off all sorts of other kind of marketing and communications activity. So we have a thing this year called Kickabout, which is basically how all of the kids in the schools across the UK can basically take part and get involved in the Soccer Aid event. So that, I think, is a really good example. Here's another one. So back to my point around the UK and the kind of what about my backyard, we have now started to kind of do more than just the 2 programs we're already delivering. This is a piece of research we did, which is all about making sure that the people in the UK know how important getting your child vaccinated is. And in fact, 500,000 children in the UK are not vaccinated. I told you that today we'll vaccinate 7.6 million children. So we can bring that home. We can make it relevant to people at home. And people go, UNICEF, yeah, they're the guys that are helping vaccinate children in the UK as well as all over the world. And the same goes for cities. So cities is a really big, important theme for UNICEF. And there are all sorts of challenges with cities, car accidents and safety for children, but also pollution. And again, what we've done in the UK is we've then done a whole piece of research around making sure that the government is really on top of trying to reduce the pollution in cities to make sure that children are not breathing in toxic air, because a child is absorbing way more pollution than an adult, and that's not fair. Every child's breath is under threat in the UK. We've also got really cool ambassadors. So this is a great way of kind of reaching people. This is Paddington. I can't think of a better ambassador for children who kind of need help than Paddington. I'm sure everyone knows the story. So he's a brilliant advocate, a brilliant ambassador for us. And then kind of following that sport and football theme, we also have this guy. I don't know if anyone's heard of this guy, but this guy, David Beckham, came to UNICEF, and I think this is interesting because he could just be an ambassador, and he could come to events like this, and he can talk about what he's doing with UNICEF. But what David really wanted to do is he wanted to really focus on particular parts of the world and particular things that he and his family are really passionate about. So what we did was we said, look, how do you use all of the amazing UNICEF superpowers, and how do we use all of yours and combine them? So let's create your own foundation. And it sits kind of underneath UNICEF. And that enables David to get really involved. And I've been lucky enough to meet David and talk about the foundation with him. And what's really interesting about it is that you can really tell when you meet people whether they're doing this because they just want to kind of look good, or maybe they want to get like a knighthood or something, or people who really care. And sometimes certain people, like that are ambassadors, you might have to give them a little nudge, a little push. But with David, it's the other way around. Like the UNICEF team are like, oh my God, he's pushing us so hard. It's phenomenal. And to have someone like David there, again, enables us to communicate in a different way to a different audience about different things. And I think that's really important. So then thinking about, I guess, some of the other stuff that we're doing to really try to kind of deliver this this impact and this change that we're looking for, UNICEF internally, is moving to becoming a much more agile, a much more kind of empowered and responsive organization. We're moving into being much more iterative in the way that we market and communicate and work. We're kind of bringing together our teams so they're multidisciplinary and cross-functional. We're focusing on the impact rather than going out and saying, give us lots of money. And we've also got this one UNICEF approach. And the other thing we're doing is we're recruiting and we're learning from the best. So one thing we're going out to cool organizations that are doing amazing things, like Spotify, ASOS, Monzo, the Financial Times, and we're saying, FT, how did you get to 1 million paying subscribers? Monzo, how did you become a unicorn in less than 3 years? ASOS, how do you kind of merchandise? And so on and so on. And we basically are having these guys work with us to kind of improve the way that UNICEF operates as an organization. And they've been really happy to do that. The other thing we've done is we've created a thing called a boost budget. So basically, we have kind of like ROI metrics. For every pound that we spend, we want to get this back. And as soon as someone hits that sort of target, that goal, they can access more funding. They haven't got to go and talk to their boss. They haven't got to write a business case. They can basically just execute and spend. We also have an innovation stream called Launchpad, which is trying new stuff continually. We've moved the business away from thinking about 12 months to looking at it in a much more quarterly kind of fashion. So we're forecasting and reviewing on a much more regular basis. And we're also kind of really open, and it's one of the reasons why we're here, really open to working with new, exciting marketing and technology companies that genuinely feel, number one, that they want to kind of make a difference, they want to have purpose and deliver impact, but also they've got great software, great services, great ideas about how we can do more for children. And, really important, goes without saying, you've got to have the support of the exec. You've got to have the support of the board, and we've got that in droves in the UK. Really strong support, so that everyone knows inside the organization that we're with them all the way. The other thing that you have to think about when you're an organization like UNICEF is risk. We have lots of different sort of stakeholders, and we are governed by a UN charter, and we have in the UK the Charities Commission and the Financial Conduct Authority and all of these other organizations. And so it's very easy when you have all of that sort of regulation and bureaucracy to sort of not try to innovate, because innovation could result in mistakes. Innovation could result in failure. But what we're trying to do now is instill much more a culture of being aware of the risks. So look, I'm going to try this new AI advertising solution. It's going to be able to deliver millions of variants of our advertising campaigns, and it's going to optimize them. But these are the risks. These are the things that could happen. And so we kind of talk about what those risks are, and we go, okay, well, we're aware of these risks. We're prepared to kind of go with that, and we're going to try it, and we're going to test it, and we're going to learn it, and so on. You guys know all of this, I'm sure. And then the other thing to back all of this up, I guess, is real-time reporting, because ultimately when you're trying stuff, you've got to be able to kind of know what's working, what's not working, and what could kind of work harder. And then I guess the kind of final thing is the brand itself and the story itself, which ultimately I think is so important. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to share something with you that I'm not allowed to share. And you'll see when I play this video, there's a disclaimer saying this video must not be shared, so please don't tell anybody you saw this. Because I know I'm amongst friends here. And also, just kind of, I'd love your feedback on it, but bear in mind that it's actually effectively a kind of an internal video that we have created that is going to kind of embody a new way, a different way that UNICEF is going to talk to the world and hopefully continually make the world a better place for children. So I'm going to play this, and I'd love to get your feedback after. See the disclaimer? you turn the volume up a bit?
We are UNICEF, and we're changing the world, one child at a time. How? By doing more good in more places for more children than any other charity. We have 13,000 people in 190 countries. We hydrate, vaccinate, and educate millions of children every year. We built the largest humanitarian warehouse system on Earth. Think Amazon, only way more important. We drive aid convoys through deserts, land cargo planes on dirt tracks. We span time zones and work in war zones. We advise governments, influence corporations, and lobby presidents. Yeah, even him. And all to give every child what they need most, more than a chance to survive, a chance to be great. Because we don't see children as weak. We see them as strong, strong enough to change the world. UNICEF. Help a child. Change the world.
Thank you very much for having me. Cheers.